Dory Clark. Hello, Dory. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Van. So nice to be speaking with you.
It's so great. I just said to Dory, I remember so well, 10 years ago, Dory was my guest on New York Brand Lab Radio, and it was just audio. So the stress of doing video is a whole different ballgame, but I'm so thrilled to see you. Now, I know if you don't know who Dory Clark is, shame on you. Go immediately to doryclark.com. But Dory she is a remarkable and exuberant human being who has changed she's reinvented, reframed, and reimagined her world several times. And that's why she's a perfect walk outside the line person. New York Times calls her an expert at self-reinvention and helping others make changes in their lives. Do you mind if I do this, Dory?
Do it. Why not?
Let's do it. Named on the top 50 business thinkers in the world, thank you, Thinkers 50, recognized as the #1 communication coach in the world by the Marshall Goldsmith Leading Global Coaches Award. Keynote speaker, consultant, teaches at various universities, frequent contributor to the Harvard Business School, and of course, 3 books. You've got one under your belt, right? You're doing another one right now, Dory?
I do. It's coming out September 21st. It's going to be called The Long Game.
Oh, fabulous. Well, already Dory is the author of Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out. Many clients, global clients. I could go on, but we've got to get back to the show, right, Dory? So I just wanted to start by, I was listening to our interview the other day, and Dory was saying that she wanted to, she had a lot of opinions, right? A lot to say about a lot of different things. And what she wanted to work out was how to make money sharing her opinion. And I remember loving that so much. I mean, who wants to do that? I mean, it's so, and of course that's what you're doing. So Dory, if I asked you, what do you most like to do? Would you say it's still pretty much the same, or there's probably a whole bunch of other things you could add to that?
I do like to give my opinion. It's true. You know, my stream of ex-girlfriends will validate that.
I did. Oh, wow. Yes.
It's always good when, you know, you can harness things to the good professionally.
Right. What a relief, right? Because I was reading the other day that Carl Jung said that our job is not to fit in. Our job is to be as eccentric as possible. Because if we start honing our edges, we become like everybody else. So Dory, with your reputation for helping people become a recognized expert and to show up like they mean it, how do you start with helping somebody actually relentlessly be who they are? How would you start if somebody is not sure about how to really be who they are and stop this nonsense with fitting in?
Well, then I think that it's true. I mean, it's kind of ironic, right? That if you are different than the norm, whatever the norm is in your particular realm, it's sometimes harder to get noticed. It's harder to initially attract attention because based on people's pattern recognition, they're like, who's that? You know, that person doesn't seem like an executive, or that person doesn't seem like a whoever. But ironically, over time, the value of difference compounds, because once you do break in, the fact that you are different in that position actually gives you status, and it makes you memorable, because people say, oh, wow, you know, if she's able to be like that and be a successful executive, then, you know, she must have it really going on. And so you actually become more successful as a result of that difference. But it's usually that early phase where you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe I should try to just be like everybody else, you know, in order to get in. And it really takes sort of strength of will and strength of character to plow through that time before we have validation, before we have the external, you know, support and people saying, oh yeah, you're so amazing. So when it comes to actual practical tools to do this, I would say one of the best things that I advise people to do early on is to actually start by getting a clearer sense of the field. I think sometimes that can reassure us, and it can also give us a better sense of where our true differences actually lie. So for me personally, you know, around the time we first had our conversation in 2012, one of the things that I was doing very intensively was actually writing really frequently for Forbes, like 10, 15 times a month. And most of those were interviews with fellow authors, fellow business thinkers. And it was actually great because it familiarized me with their ideas. I had a better sense of the field and what was being discussed in the field. And as a result, I kind of knew what normal was, and I could make choices, informed choices about how to calibrate myself accordingly, which things that I wanted to hew to and where I said, you know what, I actually disagree. I'm going to deviate here.
Well, I think it takes, as you say, a great deal of will and clarity and intention to stay on that path. Because I remember you saying, you were just not going to give up. I mean, remember you had certain articles that people didn't pay attention to right away, but you stayed on that path, right? So there are a lot of people, I think, out there who get frustrated, upset, impatient, and they give up too soon. I mean, that's not helpful, is it? Absolutely not.
Right. I mean, this in many ways is the central theme of the book that I'm writing that is coming out in September, The Long Game. The subtitle is How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And so much of what I have seen is that, there are a lot of really smart, genuinely talented people that I want them to be getting their ideas out there. I want to cheer them on and encourage them. But oftentimes we fold in the face of resistance. And I mean, it is so vanishingly rare. I think we understand this intellectually, but it's different when we get it personally. But it is so vanishingly rare that there would ever be a human being that at every step along the way, people are just like, oh, that's brilliant. Give me more, right? Like almost always at some point, there's going to be some gatekeeper that's like, that's not any good. Like for me, I had it so many times. I got turned down from every doctoral program I applied to. I don't have a doctorate, not for lack of trying, but because nobody wanted me. And, you have to have these, you have to have enough self-possession. And in the book, I actually talk about different ways that we can cultivate more of that to say, look, I mean, God didn't appoint them the arbiters of humanity. This is just a bunch of other people that, probably don't even know more than you. It is foolhardy for us to accept other people's judgments. Now, it is true that if 100 people tell you the same thing, it's probably worth listening because you're getting it from everywhere. But in a situation like a grad school application or like an editor doesn't like it, they're one human being. They probably don't actually know more than you. And it's on us to keep trying.
Right. Absolutely. Well, where do you think you got that? Was it your parents when they gave you that intention and desire to just not give up? I mean, it's just in your DNA, Dory, do you think?
I'm not sure necessarily, but I would say certainly my mom is very encouraging. And, I was just on the cusp. I'm not a millennial, but I would say that I was kind of parented as though I were a millennial. It was like the kind of thing that probably a lot of people deride, where like every day it was just like, you are so wonderful. And, I mean, the good news is I was like, thank you. Yes. And so when I meet with people that are just like, you're not wonderful, I'm like, fuck you. You're completely wrong. I'm wonderful. And so, it's just like, you have this sort of like, I get my back up. It's just like this pit of rage. I'm like, you don't tell me who's wonderful. So anyway, I get a little fiery about that, but I want that for everyone. I want everyone, whether or not your mama was as overly performative as mine, to really feel in your heart that you have a contribution to make. And if it doesn't come naturally, like if you're doubting yourself or whatever, there are mechanisms that you can put in place. It's about building, trusted groups of people, your mentor board of directors and people that you trust that you can turn to be like, actually, is this good or not good? Like what, and if you trust those people, you can rely on them even when you might doubt your own judgment. So I'm curious, Van, you're actually someone that I mention in my new book. And one of the things that I talk about
hashtag gasp.
Your thought process around selling your agency. and which and like who to sell it to, and when, and how to think that through. And so I'm curious, when you have met with obstacles, how have you overcome that? What is the methodology that you summon?
Well, we're turning the we're turning the question here. I don't know, Dory. I just I get called to do things. I don't. I sort of. It's not like I'm seeking out something, but if something appeals to me, and it's there's a lot to do to get round to get to that. I don't really give up. I mean, look at, here I am in the middle of Mexico selling products, and branding as well. Why did I do that? I don't know. I mean, it just, I could do with a bit more of your clarity, I think, at times, but, I just don't want to give up. Maybe I'm a stubborn Capricorn.
Absolutely. I love that.
Maybe a stubborn Capricorn. But Dory, what do you do when you have clients, when you're consulting, who have that feeling like help or oh no? Because, there are a lot of people out there who don't even think they're creative. They're not confident. They can be very successful. So it's really trying to help people sort of adopt a whole different mindset, right? It's sort of it's quite a big project when you have clients who are struggling like that. Or do you not have many of those anymore?
Well, I certainly do work with a fair number of folks one-on-one doing executive coaching. And I think that to a certain extent, it's a self-selected group, in that, if someone genuinely in their heart feels like, oh, I am average, I have very little to contribute, well, I don't think that person's really going to be seeking out executive coaching, right? They're just going to be like doing their thing. The people that I am typically working with, the presenting symptom, I guess you could say, is that they are creative and smart people, and they know they have a contribution to make, and they are just frustrated because they feel like they are not yet at the point where they are able to make as big of a contribution, because not enough people are listening, or they're not really sure how to present their ideas in a way, to kind of break through. They're like, well, I tried to do this and I tried to do that, but help me out here. Why is it, if I'm a smart person and I, have these good ideas, that is not having the kind of scale of impact that I want? And so there's a gap there. And so typically what I do in working with my clients is really help them think through that process to understand, okay, let's reverse engineer it. What are the things you're doing now? What are the things you're not doing? And how can we work strategically to put the pieces in place to get you to become recognized for your expertise?
Right. Because your name and reputation has to precede you, clearly, right? That's your bottom line right now. And I think I'm very excited to hear about the book, Dory. That's perfect for right now, because look what everybody's been going through with this whole year of COVID, and feeling on the back foot and feeling lacking self-esteem, no matter how good we are. It's a tough time. So that's part of the book then, Dory. That's exciting.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm excited about it. One of the things I talk about in the book actually is that I literally got the contract, the publisher, Harvard Business Review Press, wrote to me that, the note saying, we'd like to publish the book on February 28th. And literally the next day, March 1st, was the first case of COVID in New York City. And it was the time that I was writing this book, it was right in the thick of when COVID was first breaking, so destructively. And there was actually a guy who reached out to me, this kind of casual person that I know. And he said, hey, so you're writing this book about long-term thinking. Isn't that irrelevant now? Isn't it totally not about long-term thinking because we have to adapt for the pandemic? Isn't it, short-term's better? And it's an interesting question, because of course we have to adapt and move quickly. But I would argue that if all we have is short-term thinking, it's just a constant reactive mode. We need the 30,000-foot long-term thinking so that we have the ability to actually make the short-term pivots that are necessary during a crazy time like that.
A crazy time like that. So the book's called again, The Long Game. The Long Game. Great title. How do you come up with your titles? Are they so obvious to you, or is it just something that just instinctively just feels right, I guess.
Oh, my titles are never obvious to me. I I actually, this is the first title I have actually come up with myself. My previous three books I did not title. The publisher finally came up with titles. It's like it is not a skill set. I was like, it's kind of about this, and then they came up with it. But the long game was something that I feel very proud of. I did come up with it after serious, like, intensive banging my head against a wall, because what I wanted ideally was a phrase that was familiar to people, that people used organically, but that would nonetheless connote something powerful that I could hopefully own, quote unquote, in the popular imagination if I were successful enough in marketing the book.
Right. Amazing. Well, remember, I'm just thinking back, we were talking about, remember the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman years ago had that column called Average is Over. And of course now, more than ever, we cannot afford to be average. So how did you know, Dory, that, well, how did you work out that path? Because what you were doing in 2012 has evolved, right? Now you're doing a whole bunch of other things that are helping people never be average again. So what are those things besides the recognized expert thing, the books? What else have you added quite a lot to you besides more speaking?
Yeah, thank you, Van. I think at its heart, the way that my business has evolved is something that I try to encourage other people to do as well, which at a fundamental level is really about listening to your customers. My business when I started was, enterprise level. It was consulting for companies or organizations about their marketing strategy. And, that was great. That was a good business. I liked doing it. But especially around the time that my first book, Reinventing You, came out, I started getting approached by people, by individuals saying, oh, hey, do you consult on this? Do you do private coaching? And for actually a long time, like multiple people reached out and I was like, no, I don't do that. Sorry, I don't do that. And then after a while, yeah, a lot of us, I was like, oh, why am I being an idiot? Like, why am I turning away business? Like, I could do that. Maybe I should do that. And so I think oftentimes where we run into problems as business owners and entrepreneurs is we fall in love with an idea and we say, I'm going to do this. And then you try to shove it down the market's throat and the market doesn't want it. What is far better is when people are already coming to you saying, oh, please, would you do this? And at first, sometimes we're dummies like I was, and it just took a while to recognize. But when the market is coming to you saying, do you offer this? Can you offer this? The correct answer almost always should be yes.
Isn't it funny how we keep hearing the same question and sometimes it just takes us longer to shift and pay attention, right?
Definitely.
I just wanted to say to a few people who are tuning in here, if they want to ask you a question, Dory, around, in 10 minutes, if there's some questions, we'll see what they have to ask you, Dory.
Oh, it's great. And I see some friends here. Thank you guys for tuning in. I see our friend from the Recognized Expert course and community, Julia Thielen. Thanks, Julia, for being here. And Jennifer from DC. It's great to see you. And lots of other nice folks tuning in from Mexico, from Arizona. We're glad to have you.
And a stubborn Capricorn too. What star sign are you, Dory?
I'm on the cusp of Scorpio and Sagittarius.
Right. Oh, wow. That's coming up soon.
I'm sure it explains everything, although I'm not quite sure what.
Well, Dory, tell me, I want to ask you to dare our viewers at the end when we wrap up, but I thought I wanted another dare from you sooner than later, because I think walking outside the line is really about people like you who have learned how to go out on a limb, try new things, reimagine their world. So the dare is to see how you can encourage other people, inspire them to also, get inspired to walk outside the line and just to get out of their comfort zone, really, I guess. What's one dare? Because I'm going to ask you again at the end. What's one dare?
All right. Well, if we're talking about getting outside our comfort zone, one thing that I have really noticed, which is interesting. I mean, I moved to New York now 5 or 6 years ago, and I did not have a social community here at the time. I really had to kind of build it from scratch.
Mhm.
And it was so interesting to me to realize I started organizing like dinner gatherings and inviting people to that. And it's kind of amazing how disempowered most people feel about issuing invitations. Like I don't, it's almost everybody was like so happy to be invited, but for a large percentage of them, it would never have occurred to them that they could actually invite someone themselves. And it's just sort of stunning. And I really want to encourage people to recognize, like, hey, you have the ability to be a connector. You have the ability to be an organizer and an instigator of things. Now, during COVID, we're much more virtual, obviously, but I have pivoted to organizing virtual cocktails as opposed to the in-person dinner parties. And again, people are often so appreciative. They're very excited to have the opportunity to connect with other cool folks, but they're not doing it themselves. They're not organizing the Zoom gathering. And that leaves an opening for you. And so I'd like to encourage people to really think about, could you convene a group of friends, colleagues, maybe it's a, college reunion, informal kind of thing. There's a million possibilities, but it's something that all of us can do.
Yes, I love that idea. I remember when you moved to New York. That was a big move, wasn't it? From Boston.
It was, yeah, absolutely.
From Boston, yes, I remember that. Okay, and I remember your, yes, well, okay, so everybody, you got to dare to start having a virtual cocktail party. I mean, we're all on Zoom so much. I mean, I know so many people who hate Zoom, but I feel more connected than I have in a long time. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, you're in Mexico, right? I mean, I'm sure you've got Mexico friends, but there's a lot of business contacts that you have that are in the US and, far flung. And so to be able so easily to do this is quite remarkable.
We're all doing this somehow, aren't we? I wanted to ask you another question, Dory. I've been talking to a lot of colleagues who are trying to go from one way of doing things to another way of doing things. And I know you've talked an awful lot about it and trying to tell your narrative in a way that people understand the common thread. I mean, I used to say I wear two hats. I'm a branding person and I'm now a designer artist. But it's not really two hats. It's the same hat. I just worked that out. It's the same hat. I have a creative hat that helps me do service work and product work. So how can you help some people here who might be listening? And I just see another Rexer here, Joe. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hey, goodness. Joe. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Dory. Dory's doing this so often on LinkedIn Live. This is my second interview, and you are my numero segundo interview. So I know when I watch you do your Newsweek thing, you're often saying, hi there from Mexico, hi there. So I've just been focusing on you. So I have to, anybody who wants to ask a question for Dory, send it out here right now.
I see Lizzie's giving us compliments. We'll take compliments too. Thanks, Lizzie.
Exactly. So, Dory, I mean, there's so many things I don't, in terms of how to reframe a narrative, if you're trying to change the way you see yourself, I mean, whether it's reinvention or reimagining your world. But there's so many people with this whole year behind us who are trying to think of doing something different or adding something on. What is one approach of how to get that happening?
Yeah, good question, Van, and it's one that's worthy of a prop. So my first book, Reinventing You, talks, as you might imagine, a lot about reinvention. And one of the things that I think is important is I feel like our cultural conversation around reinvention is sometimes a little bit misguided or misleading, and it throws people off because so often what gets talked about when we talk about reinvention is this kind of like, bold, dramatic move of, oh, well, she just quit her job and then she took a leap of faith and did blah, blah, blah. And, understandably, that just scares the crap out of most people because you have money to think about and you have obligations to think about. And if the way that it's posited is that it has to be this kind of, devil may care, let's light the bridge on fire, then most people are not going to do it. And I think that what is far more helpful is for people to actually think about, you know what? It can be subtle. It can be gradual.
Mhm.
And so in Reinventing You, I actually have a story about a woman named Patricia Fripp, who is now and for a long time has been a professional speaker. But what I love about her story is that she started her career as a hairdresser, and she had a salon, and she had this 10-year lease on her salon. And so she gave herself a 10-year runway. She said, you know what? At the end of this 10 years, when my lease is up, I'm not going to renew my lease. That's my plan. I'm going to take the 10 years to reinvent myself as a speaker. And so what she did was, you know, in the early days, she made like a little tiny bit of money, but she would reinvest it in the business, and she could, you know, okay, she could buy a nice website for herself, or she could get extra training or whatever. Over time, she made more money. And by the time year 10 rolled around, she had more than replaced her income as a hairdresser. And so she was able to just, you know, like, it's not about leaping off a cliff. She was able to just saunter into her new career because she had given herself so much margin. And so I'll just mention for folks who are interested in thinking it through themselves, I actually have a free resource. It's a reinvention self-assessment, and you can get it at doryclark.com/reinvent.
Fabulous. I have that. Maybe that's why I did what I did all those years ago. I'm just looking. Do we have any questions for Dory? No, we don't. Not at the moment. Dory, I'm going to remind you of the dare that you gave to listeners in 2012. One of them was to relentlessly be yourself, which we talked about before, and the other one was adopt a rescue pet. It'll make you a better person. Are your two cats? Were they rescue cats?
Well, of course they are. They're from the Bronx. they keep it real. My cat's from the Bronx.
Oh,
Yeah,
God. They're always in the background on your couch.
We did early on. We got a little drive-by from Philip. I think they are hiding somewhere right now. But yes, I have two very handsome little rescue cats.
I thought that was such a great dare. So what can you give us another dare like that to get, maybe not to get people out of their comfort zone, but just to try and think differently?
Yeah, absolutely, Van. You know, when it comes to ways that we can push ourselves to think differently, I think it's so easy for us to fall into the same habits of being, the same habits of doing. You know, there's some interesting books that have been written in recent years, Charles Duhigg and Roy Baumeister, about habits and habit formation. And it turns out like 40% of our daily activities are governed by habit. You know, it's kind of crazy. And so in terms of things to think about or do, one thing that I actually like to do is to create a list of fun things to do. And what I mean by that specifically is, in the moment, sometimes if you're like, oh, I want, you know, like it's Saturday afternoon, what should I do? In the moment, it's often really hard to think about that. And so we fall back on, well, I'll just go to a movie, or I'll just, you know, do the thing I usually do. But if you actually keep this perspective list of like, oh, well, I read about this in a paper, and, you know, it's in a centralized database, it's much easier to scan that and to say, oh, I could do that. Again, you know, a little less relevant during the pandemic, but you could even do it about, like, you know, instead of watching like yet another thing that you normally do on Netflix, you know, save those articles about like, oh, here's the 20 underappreciated films, you know, from the 1960s or something. And then you'll have something, you know, that can prompt you to do what you wouldn't normally do.
Yes, I like that, because we really have to keep active and keep mindful about what we're doing, right? And having enough fun, right? Because we can't do so much. Dory, about creativity, I just want to ask you this question. I mean, there's so many people who actually are convinced they don't have a creative bone in their body, and it's very frustrating, right? I mean, we are all creative. I think we all are creative, whether we're an accountant or, you know, accountants have a wonderful way with magic with numbers, right? That's how I see it. So how can you encourage people for those who don't believe they're creative, or who feel stuck and they're trying to move forward? How would you tell them how would you convince them that of course you're creative? What were you thinking? Is that what you would do? I mean, how can you inspire some people out there who think, oh my God, you know, I mean, just.
Well, I think, Van, sometimes it's hard if someone truly believes something to convince them otherwise. So actually yes, I think everyone has the potential to be creative for sure, but I wouldn't go head on. I would say, okay, fine. You're not creative. Who cares? And the reason I would say who cares is that is still not an excuse for you not to create things. Again, I'm going to go back to one of my favorite things. Let's say you think you're the most unimaginative person in the world. Fine. You know what? Interview other people. If you interview other people, it is a way that you can build connections and build your network. It's a way that you can increase your own knowledge. It is a way that you can actually begin to say, oh, wait, maybe I actually do see it a little differently. And then you might begin to convince yourself that you are creative. So I think that you don't have to start at the place of this paralyzing, oh my God, what do I write about? I don't know. No, focus on other people that you think are interesting, help them shine, help present them to other people. And in so doing, you will discover possible leads on your own ideas.
I love that. Thanks, Dory. I was going to ask you the question, when did you know who you wanted to become? Because that's I just love that whole notion. That's a good question to start thinking about wrapping up. When did you know who you wanted to become? Or, and I mean, your future self. I mean, do you have a conversation with your future self at times? Well, let's start with the when did you know? Sorry, Dory. Sorry.
Well, I think, it sort of implies in some way, and this may be true for some people, but it sort of implies that there's like a, sort of revelatory moment where it's like, oh, this. And I'm not sure I really had that per se. I certainly always had a kind of amorphous sense that I wanted to do important things and I wanted to be helpful and and certainly I also had a sense of the type of thing that I liked. I knew I wasn't going to be some Fields Prize winning mathematician. That was not going to be my future. But so there were certainly some things that I was better at than others, but I didn't know how I would manifest that. I really had to kind of stumble into it because at the end of college, when we're sort of asking ourselves these questions, I was very, I was flummoxed in some ways because the things that I was interested in doing did not have a clear path forward. It was not self-evident how one would do it. And so I really just had to kind of push and experiment and try things. And so I'm not sure there really was a moment where it's like, oh, I want that, because I didn't really have a way of imagining exactly what my career would look like. But I did know I wanted to give my opinion.
That could be a tagline on the next book, Dory. How to have an opinion and make money at the same time. Oh, I love it. So do you ever, stay on page. Do you ever, do you like this idea of talking to your future self?
I do like it as a concept and as a way of, sort of helping to clarify, where you want to go and what are the things that, it's sort of like the, hey kid, wear more sunscreen type thing. What are the things that we would be really glad that we have done now? And, it does put it into perspective. I mean, 75-year-old Dory is going to really be encouraging 42-year-old Dory to go to the gym. I am sure of that. So it is a good clarifying device.
I get it. Yes, I have a future self. I don't quite know what she looks like. I don't ever give her, she's more an energy, right? So that's bringing a different kind of energy. And I'm going to ask you a question. I don't see any questions here. I think everybody's just saying how much they're enjoying this, which is so lovely. Thank you, everybody. Dory, what about the energy thing? When people ask me what a brand is, I just say it's a feeling people have about who you are, what you do, and why any of us should give a damn. So what is, do you feel that this, do you have, I mean, you're a branding expert. Do you have the same, do you get that feeling about the energy that a brand can bring to the table? Or would you give it a different kind of definition?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I mean, ultimately, whether it's a corporate brand, whether it's a personal brand, you know, what are people thinking about you? What are people feeling about you? Things do feel different. I mean, I think about my college visits, right? I mean, this is probably true for anybody who, you know, pre-pandemic was able to set foot on the campus, but like the campus has a vibe. You can tell, you know, is this my kind of place or not my kind of place? And I think that it's very similar for companies.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we meet people, we either there's always that feeling of whether you like them or not, and sometimes the magnetic force keeps you apart. You know, I mean, just it's a strange thing, the whole energy thing. Well, listen, Dory, I'm so happy to have you here. I am. Oh, here's one from Rye. What is your advice? Can you see that?
I can see that. Yes, I'm delighted to.
Can you read it out, Dory, for me?
I can. I'm delighted to. And this will be a great way to close because I actually do need to wrap after this. But Rye, thank you for your great question. What is your advice for youngsters entering college to discover their career and passions? Well, actually, as it happens, Dean Joe Sprangle, who is on our chat right now at Mary Baldwin University, he can probably give some great advice about this too. So feel free yourself to weigh in, Joe. But I will say that ultimately, and this is actually a theme that I talk about a lot in my new book, The Long Game, which is coming out in September 21st from Harvard Business Review Press. I actually encourage people, you know, not necessarily to search for their passions, because that, I think, it puts a lot of weight on it, right? It makes it feel like this severe, serious thing. It's like, oh, I have to get it right. It's the search for my passion. And you can get a little paralyzed sometimes when it's like, oh my gosh, the stakes are so high. What I actually advise people to do is just focus on what they're curious about, focus on what they're interested in. And if you are optimizing for interesting, then good things will happen, because you begin to sort of move down the direction of things that captivate you. And the more immersed you become in that world, the more you will begin to learn where the gaps are and where you can make a contribution.
Great, Rye. Good question. Thank you, Dory. Well, listen, I'm going to let you go and do what you need to do. I can't thank you enough, Dory, for being my second wonderful guest on Walk Outside the Line. And you go walk outside the line today, right? That's what you're going to do.
I'm going to go walk and get a falafel bowl right now. I'm going to walk outside that line. Yes.
Oh, fabulous. Well, we'll be in touch soon, Dory. Thank you so much. Hasta pronto.
Thank you, Van. So good to see you. And thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to see all these wonderful comments.
Thanks. Bye.